Anyway, and I'll introduce Stefan. Born, for the most part, raised in Oklahoma, Stefan grew up in Hera before moving to the Oklahoma City metro area. Stefan was introduced to activism in Oklahoma City through the good folks at Joy Mennonite Church and the Oklahoma Center for Conscience and Action. Stefan is not a terrorist, although for one of his actions, he may be charged with terrorism. Stefan pedicabs to pay the bills and currently organizes with the Great Plains Tar Sands Resistance. Stefan Warner.
Thank you for having me, Batch. Thank you everybody for being here. Yeah, like I said, or like Batch said, I grew up in Hera, Oklahoma, which is just about 30 minutes east of here. I'm glad everybody's here. Recently, a friend of mine, my best friend Eric Whelan, was reading a book about the Dust Bowl, and the intro said, "This is a book about capitalism in the land." And in it, the book talked quite a bit about the Dust Bowl and how all the leaders in the time denied it, and now, it's man-made. I think that's a similar situation today with climate change and all the environmental degradation that's happened here, at least on this continent, since the Industrial Revolution. I want to point out, though, that today, in addition to being Earth Day, today Land Run Day is being celebrated here. Not just like everywhere, but the schools it's being taught to students. Our friend Sarah Adams Cornell with I Don't Know More is opposing this and providing educational opportunities to do something else. But the reason I mention that is because this land was originally called Indian Territory when it was reserved for all the indigenous peoples that were relocated here at the hands of the United States federal government. This land was toss-away land until the oil and gas industry made this place profitable. And then the land run happened in 1889, taking away the land that was reserved for the indigenous folks that were relocated here. In the early 1920s, ConocoPhillips started it on Ponca land up north, eventually building a refinery that now processes 8% diluted bitumen, also known as tar sands oil. In the 90s, this refinery leaked a chemical called benzene, which resulted in the second forced relocation of the Ponca people to a different area from the original area they were relocated. Some people will also call this environmental racism. Has anybody ever heard that term, environmental racism? Yeah. Show of hands. Does anybody know who coined that term or one of the people credited for the original definition?
Probably Earl Hatley.
That's one guy. He's from Oklahoma. He's pretty awesome. Some of the research I did was another guy named Benjamin Chavis. Has anybody heard of him? He's a former director of the NAACP. Working definition he said was environmental racism is racial discrimination in environmental policy making and enforcement of regulations and laws. The deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, official sanctioning of the presence of life, threatening poisons and pollutants for communities of color, and the history of excluding people of color from leadership of the environmental movement. The reason I wanted to mention that particularly was that last piece, excluding people of color from leadership in the environmental movement. Environmental racism is not just something that Chesapeake, Devon, BP, all these awful corporations do. It's something that we're complicit in as well as folks within the environmental movement, and something we should take into consideration moving forward as we fight this battle. I want to move on and mention 4 people and see if you recognize any of them. Jim Inhofe, James Langford, Jim Bridenstone, I think is how you pronounce it, or Jim Bridenstine. I'm not for sure how to pronounce his name, and T.W. Shannon. The punchline's coming. What do they have in common besides being elected officials? They're all climate change deniers, and they really, lately I've been thinking about it. They really remind me a lot of the tobacco industry. Because back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, tobacco was there's more and more research and more evidence showing that tobacco product was linked to lung cancer as well as other negative effects. Surgeon General's report in 1964 confirmed that lung cancer was attributed to tobacco products. This industry continued to mislead the public as well as fund PR campaigns to target tobacco towards kids, amongst other people. This is now happening on a global scale with the oil and gas industry and climate change. But it's not just the consumers that are affected negatively. It's everyone. Unfortunately, those that are impacted are the poorest of the poor, the people that cannot afford air conditioning, that cannot afford to move from their homes when the coasts rise and when earthquakes happen. The profiteers don't have to see, and they will not see the effects caused of climate change because they have money. A couple of the ways they make their money is through tar sands and fracking. Both of these cause cancer, just like tobacco. One chemical used in both of these is called benzene. Have you ever heard of benzene? It's a known human carcinogen. It's disgusting. This chemical is found quite a bit in the waters near Beaver Lake Cree First Nations land in Alberta, where tar sands mine is happening the size of Florida. Benzene is also related to fracking, and generally you can see it in water around areas that are heavily fracked, like say Payne County, Logan County, where Devon currently has 280 frack rigs. Besides Devon and Chesapeake, there's also one corporation I'd like to mention now from Oklahoma is Continental. Continental CEO is Harold Hamm. Anybody ever heard of him? He's a billionaire. He's worth $11 billion. He once said that fracking protests have not taken off in Oklahoma yet. So it's our job to prove him wrong. He was also the energy advisor to Mitt Romney. Are we seeing a connection between these industries and any particular political parties? Chesapeake Energy, some of our friends here in Oklahoma, they're recently being brought up on criminal charges in Michigan for misleading the public and violating antitrust suits. Devon, one of my favorites, they're not only involved in fracking here in Oklahoma and Texas, but they also are involved in mining tar sands in Alberta. These corporations located here at home are some of the worst outputters of carbon and methane gases. Now, briefly, I just want to mention, we've talked about KXL, or somebody mentioned Great Plains Tar Sands Resistance did many civil disobedience actions. That's true. We are a group that, one of our main points is to do direct action against infrastructure of tar sands. So we did quite a bit of direct actions against the construction of the KXL on the southern leg. I did the math like Bill McKibben did, but a little bit differently. The KXL supposedly will pump about 740,000 barrels of oil through Oklahoma now that it's operational. For every hour of direct action that stopped construction, or at least slowed it down, that was 92,500 barrels of oil slowed down per hour. That's a lot of money. That's pretty, in my opinion, pretty awesome. There was 33 arrests, 10 actions that happened on the KXL easement. So that would have been at least 30 to 40 hours. So I feel like we did a decent job for being a very small grassroots campaign. Unfortunately, the southern leg of the KXL is in the ground. The northern section might be constructed. We'll see. Thank God the Lakota folks up there are resisting and organizing to fight. The Flan South is another pipeline that is getting built through Oklahoma currently that is going to pump through another 800,000 barrels of oil. I just want to mention real quick, and I'll shut up, that in Texas, since the year 2000, some areas, especially in the Fort Worth-Denton area, fracking has increased by 800%. And like I mentioned, in Payne County and Logan County near Mulhall, 280 rigs are being operated by Devon. Christina Mills from Fort Worth mentioned about a frack rig being built in her backyard. I'm never sick, but in the past 18 months, I've had pneumonia 3 times. That is awful, and that's why we cannot just focus on climate change. We must directly relate these industries to the communities that are being affected today, and not just some time in the future when climate change will affect all of us. But fracking does contribute to climate change. It's not a clean energy source. A recent study showed that methane is being released up to 1,000 times more than EPA estimates in Pennsylvania, in the Marcellus Shale, where Chesapeake is currently fracking. Methane traps 20 to 30% more heat than carbon dioxide. It's unacceptable. So with all that being said, we have a lot of work to do. We, as in Great Plains Tar Sands Resistance, we're doing an intro to nonviolent direct action training May 10th at First Unitarian Universalist Church. I invite all of you to come and please get involved, as well as May 7th, Alec Johnson, one of the folks facing time because of stopping construction of the Keystone XL, has having a motion to dismiss his hearings May 7th in Atoka County. Please join us. Thank you.